All right, so later on in the semester, we're going to be very interested in rewriting trig functions with their parentheses that are understood in the notation. So back in your trig class, we talk about the difference between cosine raised to the fifth of x versus cosine x to the fifth. Now, when you talk about a trig function, first of all, remember that cosine of theta, this theta value that we have is, of course, the angle that we are looking at, and that angle is also known as the argument of the trig function. So you might have heard about like it's the angle, but really we can also refer to it as the argument of the trig function. Now, we talk about in trig class how like you can write it as cosine of theta, or you can put parentheses around the argument, and those parentheses, when it's just one term, are understood. So if you look here at cosine of x to the fifth, the argument is this x raised to the fifth power. So the understood parentheses there would be around just the x to the fifth, and we would say that the argument of this trig function is equal to x to the fifth. Now, if you compare that where the 5 power is sandwiched in between the cosine and the x, in this case, this notation is going to be very important for us to understand, and this notation means that we have cosine x, and all of this is raised to the fifth power. So actually what we have in the case of cosine raised to the fifth of x is we have cosine written out 5 times. So we have cosine x, cosine x, cosine x, 5 times. That is what is being represented with this cosine x to the fifth. Now, if you compare that to the notation of cosine x to the fifth, where the argument is x to the fifth, what is notated by that is really the fact that you have cosine and then inside you have 5 x's. So it is a very different thing writing cosine 5 of x versus cosine x to the fifth. And we really want to understand that the parentheses, when it's sandwiched in between, it's around the entire function. Here the parentheses are just around the argument. So as a quick other example, let's say you had something like this. Let's say you had tangent squared x. Tangent squared x, again, is really the same thing as tangent x, all in parentheses, squared. Okay? So that's going to be very important for us understanding that when this little exponent is sandwiched in between, it's really that whole function that is being raised to the second power.